What's up, you guys? The Curious Owl here, and please excuse the fact that I am now sitting on my floor because unfortunately my camera was dying as I was doing some recording earlier, and I couldn't get my charger to reach the top of my tripod, so I had to set my camera down lower so that the charger could reach it and so I can continue to record. So right now what I'm going to do is my December 2017 wrap-up. Now, in the month of December, I had a really hard time reading this month because I was in a bit of a reading slump, and with it being the end of the semester and finals coming around, it was a little bit harder for me to find time to read, and then I had to go away right after my semester ended to go to a funeral, and then I stayed with Robert for 5 days, and I tried to read over the course of that time, but it was kind of hard to because the book that I was reading at the time was a little harder to get into in the beginning of it, so I will explain that in just a moment. But I did read 4 books, and I will tell you all about them. So the first book that I read, I actually started in November, but then DNF'd in December, and that was Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. Now, as I discussed in my Worst of 2017 Books video, I didn't DNF this book because I hated it. It was more of the fact that the timing of when I read it was not the right timing for me to read this book, because the synopsis of it is that it's a memoir from Elizabeth Gilbert's life. She has recently divorced from her husband, who she felt was not a good match for her, and then had been in a relationship with a man who was very toxic. Things were very back and forth between the two of them, and so she decides to get away from everything in her New York life and decides to go on this trip to Italy, India, and Indonesia over the course of a year and live in each place for about 4 months or so. And this is supposed to be a thing for her to be able to find herself again and to re-express herself and really just kind of figure out what she needs in order for her to be happy with the world that as it is now. And again, I thought it was very compelling. I thought I really enjoyed the story from what I had read of it, but I was not in the correct mindset, I think, to read this novel, as it is more than likely for someone who is dealing with some very hard times in their life. And at the time that I was reading it, I was fairly happy. I was pretty content with where I was in life, and so I didn't feel like I was giving the book justice for the kind of audience that it is particularly for. So I think that I may pick it up again in the future if I'm feeling that I'm in a more depressive state and I need something to kind of pull me out of it. But it is not my top priority as of now to pick it back up, and I just don't think that it was the right time for me, which is why I DNF'd the book. Next book I read was Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix by J.K. Rowling, the 5th book in the Harry Potter series, and I have a full review for you guys to go check out if you would like to. This is my least favorite book of the Harry Potter series so far. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars, and the reason is because this took me 3 weeks to read, where most of the Harry Potter books was taking me maybe at most a week. And that was if I was feeling a little sluggish with my reading. This book, though, was a lot harder to get into because there was a lot of things that were building up to the idea of getting to Hogwarts. Because in this book, in the very beginning, after dealing with the death of Cedric Diggory and Goblet of Fire, Harry and Dudley are attacked by a rogue Dementor that causes Harry to have to use his Patronus to protect himself and his cousin, and so because of that, the Ministry is trying to expel Harry from Hogwarts, and so he has to go to trial, and he has to live in the Burrow for a little while with the Weasley family, and there's a lot of stuff that basically builds up to before we even get to Hogwarts, which is like at least 200 pages. And because of that, things were really, really slow-paced for me. I didn't feel that there was a lot of urgency going on, at least until after the trial. And so it didn't really strike my fancy as much as the other books did. I still did thoroughly enjoy it once I got to a point where things were really starting to pick up, and especially when Harry had started creating the DA and was getting all these people to join him to learn Defense Against the Dark Arts outside of Umbridge's class. And I just really did enjoy it, but I didn't enjoy it as much as I think I did in the past because I felt that it was so much more slow-paced than I had remembered it. The next book I read was called The Traitors, Crux by Jessica Prather. This was a book that was sent to me by Off Tomes Publishing to read in the month of December, and it was actually a release in November, so it's fairly new, and it focuses on this main girl named Kennedy Coria, who essentially finds out she has superpowers and is recruited by the current dystopian president of the United States, as this is a dystopian story. And he basically tells her that if she wants to save her brother, who has been in prison for the last several years, she needs to essentially infiltrate this refugee camp of witches and wizards and find a way to tear it down from the inside. And it's a very, very hard book to read in the case that Kennedy is very much struggling throughout this whole novel because she knows it's not right to bring all these people down who are just trying to live in peace, but she also is battling with the fact that she's trying to save her brother. And so it was really cool to see that kind of conflict within her, and I thought it made Kennedy a very strong character. I did like the fact that I felt that it was a good mix of things like X-Men and Witch and Wizard by James Patterson and Gabrielle Charbonnet. It's similar in the fact to Witch and Wizard, as the main character doesn't know what her powers are and she's trying to figure them out as the story goes. And it's like X-Men because there is the refugee camp for the Witch and Wizards, similar to how there is a school for gifted children that Charles Xavier builds up in X-Men that is basically for them to build upon their powers and learn about them and learn how to control them and learn how to use them. And it's essentially its own little society, which I really, really liked. One of the things I did not like as much with this book is the fact that it was a little bit more fast-paced than I had anticipated. It was very quick, but in some cases the fast-pacedness worked in times of more climactic kind of events, but the whole novel itself was in a fast-paced mode, which I thought was a little unnecessary because it didn't really leave much room for Kennedy to contemplate and to really connect with a lot of the characters. I didn't feel like the relationships were super well developed. There was definitely an insta-love trope that was thrown in that I think could have been built on more over the course of more time, because the story I think took place over the course of maybe several months, whereas I thought that the story would take place maybe over the course more of a couple of years, maybe several years, because the kind of circumstances that Kennedy has to go into this camp rely on the fact that she builds the trust of the community and especially the leaders of the community, and that takes a lot of time. So I would have liked to have seen Jessica Prather really build this more into a several years kind of story and kind of showing different things that Kennedy does with the leaders and with the community in order to build their trust, as opposed to just kind of glossing over everything in the course of several months. But I did still really enjoy it. I do look forward to reading the next books that come out in the series, as this is the first novel in the series, and I essentially gave it 3 out of 5 stars, and I do look forward to reading more of them, but it was a little lackluster for me in some places. And finally, the last book I read in December 2017 was Blood Rose by Danielle Rose, the first book in the Blood Rose trilogy. The third book just came out in November, and so Ofttimes was also giving this out to readers to be able to review in hopes that they would continue the series and be able to look into the third novel. And I really, really enjoyed this book a lot. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, but I still really enjoyed it. The thing I didn't like about it was the fact that it was too short. It was 264 pages, and I thought that there could have been so much more that could have been added to the end of this novel, but regardless of that, the novel was still really well done. And it was weird because in my review I had talked about how the fast-pacedness of this story worked, and I will explain a little bit as to why. So the problem I have with fast-pacedness is I feel that there's no urgency when it comes to why things are so fast-paced. I feel that the only time fast-pacedness is really used well is when it's in climactic events, when things are really picking up and things are starting to get really dire and things of that nature. The problem lies when an author plays into it too much, but there's no real dire need for a fast-paced story, which is why The Traitor's Crux, I didn't like the fast-pacedness of that novel as much. In comparison to Blood Rose definitely felt that there was an urgency and a dire emergency at every point and every turn of the novel, because there was so much that was riding on the main character Ava and her ability to use her powers and things of that nature. And so I really enjoyed that aspect of using the fast-pacedness because I thought it fit more with the kind of situation that was being dealt with, and I thought that it gave a little bit more as to how important a lot of this stuff really is in the novel. The synopsis of the novel basically is that this girl Ava is a witch, or is a former witch, and is turned into a vampire by a vampire who is trying to protect her coven from a set of rogue vampires. And so when she's turned into a vampire, she still has her witch abilities, which is very uncommon. It's almost unheard of at this point. And so she is basically able to be half witch, half vampire, and essentially has to figure out how to protect herself and her vampire coven from future attacks by this rogue vampire group who is now after her because of her abilities. And I really, really enjoyed it, and the relationship that was between her and the vampire who turned her, named Jasek, was interesting because it almost seemed like an insta-love trope, which I would not have liked had it been done in a different way. The reason though I liked the relationship between the two of them was that it was more of an actual bond because of what he did for her and the kind of meaning that's behind, because when he turned her, basically it was almost like a blood pact, and because of that she wasn't quite sure how to feel about J6. She was kind of going back and forth, but there was this very strong connection between the two of them. And I think that that speaks a lot for how insta love could be done, and it's more along the lines of it has to make sense with the situation. It makes sense to me that Ava would fall for Jasek because of the fact that not only did he save her life, but the kind of way he saved her life creates a everlasting bond that is similar to something like Rose and Lissa in the Vampire Academy series, where because Lissa drinks from Rose's blood so often, they have a psychic connection, they have a very strong connection between the two of them that makes it impossible for them to be separated for too long without suffering some kind of consequence from it. And so I liked how that was implemented into this story because it definitely seemed to work for me. So there you guys go. Those are the 4 books that I read in December 2017. Let me know if you guys have read these books yourselves and what you thought of them, if you agreed with me, if you disagreed with me, and let me know some other books that you read in this month that you were really excited to read. So thank you guys so much for joining me in this video. If you guys did enjoy it, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye, guys!